My name is Carol, and for 40 years, my world was balanced on columns of numbers. I was a forensic accountant. My job was to find the lie hidden in a spreadsheet, the story that the dollars and cents were trying to tell. I thought I had retired from all that, trading spreadsheets for storybooks with my grandson, Leo. I was wrong. The biggest lie I would ever uncover wasn't in a corporate ledger. It was in a hospital bed, and it was wearing my daughter-in-law's face. It started on a Tuesday. I remember the air was crisp, the kind of perfect autumn day that feels like a gift. I was in my garden, pulling up the last of the summer tomatoes, when my son, David, called. His voice was a ragged tear in the fabric of the peaceful afternoon. "Mom? You need to get to University General. It's Jessica." Jessica, my daughter-in-law. A woman who was like a whirlwind of chaotic energy. She was a dreamer, always chasing the next big idea, the next get-rich-quick venture. David, my steady, practical son, was her anchor. He adored her, and for that, I did too. "What happened, honey? Is she okay?" "She fell, Mom. Down the stairs at home. She hit her head. They're saying it's bad. She's not waking up." The tomatoes in my basket suddenly seemed impossibly red, like drops of blood against the wicker. The world tilted. A simple fall. A thing that happens every day. But as I sped to the hospital, a cold knot of unease tightened in my gut. It was the old feeling from my job, the little alarm bell that rings when a story doesn't add up. Jessica was clumsy, yes, but their staircase had a thick runner and a sturdy handrail. It just felt wrong. When I arrived, the scene in the waiting room was pure chaos. David was pacing, his face pale and drawn, his knuckles white as he clenched his phone. I wrapped my arms around him, and he just sagged against me, a weight of grief I could barely hold. "They're saying it's a severe traumatic brain injury, Mom. She's in a coma. The doctor? He said it's all up to her now. If she has the will to fight." A man in a crisp white coat approached us then. He had silver hair and a look of deep, practiced compassion. "You must be Mrs. Patterson," he said, shaking my hand. "I'm Dr. Ben Carter, the head of neurology. I'm so sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. Jessica is stable, but she's completely unresponsive. We're doing everything we can." He spoke in calm, measured tones, explaining the complexities of her condition. But as he talked, my accountant brain was kicking in, analyzing, observing. His watch was a Patek Philippe, a $30,000 piece of hardware, at least. His shoes were hand-stitched Italian leather. For a hospital administrator, he was living well. I told myself to stop. My son was grieving. This wasn't a case file. This was my family. The days that followed blurred into a monotonous, beige-colored nightmare. The hospital became our second home. The smell of antiseptic clung to my clothes. David was a ghost. He barely ate. He quit his job at the architecture firm to be by Jessica's side, holding her hand, whispering to her for hours, begging her to come back. He started talking about selling their house to cover the mounting medical bills and afford some new experimental treatment Dr. Carter had mentioned. It could stimulate her neural pathways. "Mom, it's expensive, but what's money when it's Jessica's life on the line?" He'd say, his eyes filled with a desperate hope that broke my heart. And then there was Leo. My sweet, 7-year-old grandson. He was the silent victim in all of this. His bright, bubbly personality vanished, replaced by a quiet, watchful fear. He'd sit in the hospital room, clutching his tablet, his eyes wide and scared. He refused to get too close to the bed where his mother lay, surrounded by a snake's nest of tubes and wires. The rhythmic beeping of the machines the only sign she was still with us. I tried to keep his life as normal as possible. I'd pick him up from school, we'd do his homework, I'd bake his favorite cookies. But the cloud of the hospital followed us home. Every night, he'd ask the same question. "Is Mommy going to wake up tomorrow, Grandma?" And every night, I'd have to say, "I hope so, sweetie. We all hope so." About 3 weeks into this ordeal, I was at the hospital, giving David a break so he could go home and shower. I was sitting in the visitor's chair, reading a book, while Leo was in the corner on his tablet. The room was quiet except for the beeping and the soft hum of the equipment. Suddenly, Leo walked over to me. He tugged on my sleeve, his small face unusually serious. He leaned in close. So close I could feel his breath on my ear. And whispered the words that would ignite the firestorm. "Grandma," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I don't think Mom is sleeping." I frowned, putting my arm around him. "Oh, honey, I know it looks that way. But the doctors say she's very sick. Her brain needs to heal, that's why she's in a deep." "No," he insisted, shaking his head. He looked toward the door, as if checking for spies. "She's pretending." I felt a jolt, a flash of irritation mixed with pity. He was a child, confused and scared, trying to make sense of something incomprehensible. "Leo, that's a silly thing to say. We don't pretend about being sick. Your mom had a terrible accident." But I saw her, he whispered, his eyes welling up with tears. I see her when you and Daddy leave the room. She moves. My heart ached for him. Sweetheart, sometimes people who are sick twitch, or their muscles move on their own. It doesn't mean anything. He shook his head again, more fiercely this time. His lower lip quivered. It wasn't a twitch. She scratched her nose. And yesterday? Yesterday she opened her eyes and looked at me. A cold dread, colder than anything I'd felt in the waiting room that first day, washed over me. I wanted to dismiss it. I needed to dismiss it. But Leo wasn't a child prone to fantasy. He was logical, like his father. Like me. Why didn't you tell me or your dad? I asked, keeping my voice as gentle as I could. Because Daddy gets so sad, he mumbled, looking at the floor. And she closes her eyes again real fast. I was scared. I thought maybe I was dreaming. He then held up his tablet, his little hands shaking. But I wanted to show you. So you'd believe me. He tapped the screen a few times and a video player opened. I put my tablet on the shelf over there, he pointed to a bookshelf across the room. I told Mom I was recording myself playing my game so she could watch it when she woke up. But I turned the camera around. He pressed play, the video was grainy, shot from a low angle. It showed the hospital bed, the still form of Jessica lying under the white sheets. For a full minute, nothing happened. Just the steady rise and fall of her chest, the blinking lights on the monitor. I was about to tell Leo it was okay, that his eyes were just playing tricks on him, when it happened at Jessica's hand, the one not being held by my son for hours on end, moved. It wasn't a twitch. It was a deliberate, slow motion. She brought it up to her face and methodically scratched an itch on her cheek. Then, her eyes fluttered open. Not a flicker. They opened fully. She scanned the room, from left to right, her gaze sharp and aware. Her eyes paused for a moment, seeming to look directly at the tablet's hidden lens before she settled back down, closed her eyes, and became perfectly still again. The tablet felt like a block of ice in my hands. The air left my lungs in a single, silent gasp. Every alarm bell from my 40 years as an accountant was screaming. The expensive doctor. The convenient fall. My son, being pushed to sell his house. And this. This irrefutable, horrifying proof. Leo looked up at me, his eyes searching mine for an explanation. See, Grandma? He whispered. She's faking it. And in that moment, I knew my retirement was over. A crime was being committed, and my entire family was the victim. My first instinct was to shield Leo. I knelt down, putting my hands on his small shoulders and looking directly into his terrified eyes. The video was still looping on the tablet, a silent testament to the lie we were living. I pressed stop, the screen going dark. Leo, you were so brave to show me this, I said, my voice barely a whisper. You did the right thing. But this is going to be our secret for a little while, okay? Just you and me. We can't tell Daddy just yet. It would make him very, very sad and confused. Can you promise me you won't say a word? He nodded, the tears he'd been holding back finally spilling over. I pulled him into a hug, my mind racing 100 miles a minute. My grandson was carrying a burden no child should ever have to bear. And I was the only one who could take it from him. As I held him, I looked over at the bed. At Jessica. My daughter-in-law. The woman my son adored. And I felt a cold, hard anger crystallize in my chest. This wasn't just a lie. It was an act of profound cruelty. I took Leo home, my mind a whirlwind of questions. Why? Why would she do this? Why would she put her own husband and child through this emotional torture? The answer, as it always is, had to be about money. My forensic accounting instincts, buried for years under layers of retirement and grandmotherly duties, came roaring back to life. To understand the crime, you have to follow the money. The next morning, I went to David's house under the pretense of tidying up and getting him some fresh clothes. He handed me his keys with a weary gratitude, happy to have one less thing to worry about. Thanks, Mom. I don't know what I'd do without you. His words were a small dagger in my heart. He had no idea what was really happening. Once inside, I didn't head for the laundry room. I went straight to the small home office where Jessica kept their files. It was a mess, a reflection of her personality, piles of papers, unpaid bills, and dozens of magazines with articles circled about starting your own business. It was the perfect cover. I could spend hours in here organizing, and no one would think twice. I started with the bank statements. It didn't take long to find the first red flag. For the past 6 months, their savings account had been systematically drained. Small transfers at first, then larger and larger ones, all going to a credit card I didn't recognize. I found the statements for that card stuffed in the back of a drawer. Thousands of dollars in charges. Online casinos. High-end clothing stores. Cash advances from ATMs near a racetrack an hour out of town. Jessica had a secret life, and it was an expensive one. They weren't just struggling. They were drowning in debt she had hidden from my son, but that wasn't the big discovery. The real bombshell was in a pristine, unmarked manila folder at the very bottom of the filing cabinet. Inside was a document, dated just 2 months before her fall. It was a life insurance policy. Not a normal one. This was a multi-million-dollar policy taken out on Jessica, with David listed as the sole beneficiary. My blood ran cold as I read the fine print. It had a special rider, an add-on that triggered a massive, 7-figure payout not just upon death, but in the event of a diagnosis of a permanent vegetative state or irreversible coma. The monthly premiums were astronomical, and the first payment had been made just 8 weeks ago. There it was. The motive. It wasn't just about escaping debt. It was about a life-changing payday. She wasn't just faking a coma. She was staging the performance of her life for a multi-million-dollar prize. And Dr. Carter, with his title and authority, was the one who could sign the papers to make that diagnosis official. He wasn't just an accomplice. He was the KEY.my next trip to the hospital felt different. I was no longer just a grieving mother-in-law. I was an investigator on a mission. I watched everything, everyone. I saw how Dr. Carter would sweep into the room, his voice dripping with false sympathy for David, while barely glancing at his unresponsive patient. And I paid special attention to the nursing staff. Most of them were professional and kind, but one young nurse, Chloe, caught my attention. She was jumpy, her hands always fidgeting. Whenever Dr. Carter was around, she wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. She seemed terrified of him. One afternoon, I saw her leaving Jessica's room, her face pale. I decided to take a chance. I caught up with her at the nurse's station. "Excuse me, Chloe?" I said with a warm smile. "I just wanted to thank you. You've been so attentive to Jessica. It means the world to us." She flinched, startled. "Oh. It's my job, Mrs. Patterson." "I know, but you seem to take extra care," I pressed gently. "I've noticed you're always checking her monitors. Is there something you're worried about? Any little changes, even a flutter of an eyelid, could be a sign of hope." I looked her directly in the eyes, holding her gaze. Panic flared in her eyes. She dropped the chart she was holding, papers scattering across the floor. No, nothing's changed. She's exactly as Dr. Carter says." "Exactly. I have to go," she stammered, scrambling to pick up the papers before practically running down the hall. Her reaction told me everything I needed to know. She knew. She was a witness, trapped in a conspiracy by a powerful, intimidating boss. But she was too scared to talk. Pushing her would only make her shut down completely, or worse, tip off Carter that I was suspicious. That evening, I tried to test the waters with David. He was talking again about the experimental treatment, which Dr. Carter now claimed was their last hope. "David, honey," I started carefully, "this treatment sounds incredibly expensive. And it's not guaranteed to work. Maybe we should get a second opinion before we make any decisions about selling the house." His reaction was immediate and defensive. "A second opinion? Mom, Dr. Carter is the best neurologist in the state. He's the head of the department. Are you saying he doesn't know what he's doing? He's the only one giving us any hope at all. I trust him." I backed off immediately. It was useless. David was a drowning man, and Dr. Carter was the only one throwing him a life raft that I knew was fake. Telling him the truth now would be like telling him the water he was treading was poison. He would never believe me. He would think grief was making me crazy. He'd resent me for questioning the one man he thought was trying to save his wife. I went home that night and sat in my quiet house, the evidence laid out before me. The damning video on Leo's tablet. The mountain of hidden debt. The multi-million-dollar insurance policy. I had the what, and I had the why. I knew Dr. Carter was involved, and I knew Nurse Chloe was a terrified witness, but I was at a dead end. I was a retired accountant, not a detective. How could I prove a connection between Jessica and Carter beyond a doctor-patient relationship? How could I find out what was happening behind the closed doors of that hospital? I couldn't follow them. I couldn't legally access their phone records or personal information. Trying to would only expose my hand and give them time to cover their tracks. I looked at the picture on my mantelpiece. David, Jessica, and Leo, smiling on a beach vacation just a year ago. A happy family. A complete lie. My son's entire life was being dismantled by a vicious scam, and my grandson's innocence was shattered. I felt a surge of cold, hard resolve. I couldn't do this alone anymore. I walked over to my old roll-top desk and pulled out a dusty Rolodex from my working days. I flipped through the cards until I found the one I was looking for. It just had a name and a number, Frank Miller, Private Investigations. He was a former cop, a bulldog who was brilliant at digging up the truths people wanted to keep buried. I had worked on a complex fraud case with him a decade ago. It was time to make the call. I picked up the phone, my hand steady, and dialed the number. I had taken this as far as I could on my own. It was time to bring in a professional. Frank Miller's office was exactly as I remembered it, a cramped, second-story room above a quiet bookstore, smelling faintly of stale coffee and rain-soaked pavement. He hadn't changed much in 10 years. His hair was grayer, but his eyes were just as sharp, missing nothing. He listened to my story without interruption, his face a mask of professional neutrality. I told him everything, starting with Leo's whisper and ending with the terrified nurse. I laid out copies of the bank statements, the credit card bills, and the multi-million-dollar insurance policy on his cluttered desk. Finally, I slid my phone across to him. "This is the video my grandson took," I said. He picked up the phone and watched the short, grainy clip. He played it once. Then twice. On the third viewing, he zoomed in on Jessica's face as her eyes scanned the room. A low whistle escaped his lips. "Well, I'll be damned," he murmured, looking up at me. "A coma patient checking to see if the coast is clear. You were right to call me, Carol. Your accounting skills found the motive. A kid's tablet found the evidence. This is already one for the books." He leaned back in his squeaky chair, his expression shifting from neutral to focused. "Okay. Here's what we do. I'll start a full workup on Dr. Ben Carter. Financials, personal life, professional history, the works. At the same time, I'll put a team on the hospital for round-the-clock surveillance. If Jessica's getting up and walking around, we're going to get it on camera." I felt a wave of relief so profound it almost made me dizzy. The burden was no longer mine alone. "Thank you, Frank." "Don't thank me yet," he said, his voice grim. "People who pull scams this audacious, this cruel. They're not just greedy. They're dangerous. You need to be careful. Act normal. Keep visiting the hospital. Let your son believe you're on his side. Don't give them any reason to think you're onto them." For the next week, I lived a double life. By day, I was the devoted grandmother, baking cookies with Leo and offering a supportive shoulder for David to cry on. I listened with a heavy heart as he talked about meeting with a real estate agent, convinced that selling his and Leo's home was the only way to save his wife. Dr. Carter was masterful in his manipulation, calling David with somber updates about Jessica's plateauing condition and how the experimental treatment was their only viable option. "We need to act soon, David," he'd say, his voice a bomb of poison. "The window of opportunity for this to be effective is closing." But at night, my home became a secret command center. Frank's updates would come in through encrypted texts. The first break came 3 days in. Frank had finished the background check on Dr. Carter. "You were right about the money," his text read. "Carter's living a lie. Nasty divorce cleaned him out 2 years ago. He has a gambling problem that makes Jessica's look like a hobby. Owes over $500,000 to some very unsavory characters. His pristine reputation is the only thing keeping him afloat." So, it wasn't an affair. It was a partnership born of desperation and greed. Two people, drowning in their own secret debts, who had found each other and concocted a monstrous plan to save themselves. The real evidence, the kind we could build a case on, came 2 nights later. At 2:15 a.m., Frank called me, his voice electric with excitement. "Got her. We got her, Carol." He sent me the pictures. A figure, dressed in dark blue scrubs and a surgical mask, slipped out of a little-used hospital service exit. It was Jessica. She moved quickly, without a hint of weakness, to a car waiting in the darkest corner of the parking garage. The driver was Dr. Carter. Frank's team had tailed them to an all-night diner miles away. Through the window, a long-lens camera captured them sitting in a back booth, not like lovers, but like business partners, poring over documents spread across the table. They looked tense, paranoid, their conversation urgent. They were finalizing their plan. Seeing those photos, I felt a grim satisfaction. This was it. This was the proof that would shatter the lie. But my victory was short-lived. The next afternoon, the danger Frank had warned me about arrived on my doorstep. I was watering my petunias on the front porch when a polished black sedan pulled up to the curb. A man in an impeccably tailored suit got out. He was calm, almost serene, but his eyes were cold and empty. He walked up my garden path and stopped at the bottom of the steps. "Carol Patterson?" he asked. His voice was soft, but it carried an undeniable menace. "Yes," I said, my hand tightening on the watering can. "I'm just here to deliver a message on behalf of a mutual acquaintance of your daughter-in-law, Jessica," he said, a thin smile gracing his lips. "She made a promise. A financial commitment. My employers are becoming concerned. They've been told the situation is being handled, that a resolution is imminent. We certainly hope that's true." He paused, his cold eyes drifting towards the window of my house, where he could surely see Leo's toys scattered on the living room floor. "It would be a tragedy if a delay were to cause any disruption to your quiet little life here. Please tell her our patience has a limit. A very firm one." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He gave a slight nod, turned, and got back into his car, which glided away as silently as it had arrived. I stood there, frozen, the watering can slipping from my numb fingers and clattering on the stone steps. This had just escalated beyond a simple insurance scam. These were the unsavory characters Frank had mentioned. These were the people Jessica and Carter were terrified of. And now they knew where I lived. They knew about Leo. My son wasn't just at risk of losing his house. We were all at risk of losing so much more. My phone rang, startling me so badly I nearly screamed. It was Frank. "Carol, you're not going to believe this," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "I was running a check on travel itineraries, just a long shot. And I found it. Carter just booked a flight. A one-way ticket to the Grand Cayman Islands, leaving 2 weeks from today." I sank down onto the steps, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What about Jessica?" "Nothing under her name," he said. "She'll travel on a fake passport, no doubt. But that's not the worst part. He's been busy. Over the last month, he's been moving money, his money, through a series of shell corporations. The final transfer is set up to go to an offshore account in the Caymans. An account that can't be traced." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The visit from the man in the suit. The final push from Carter to get David to sell the house. The one-way ticket. They weren't just planning to cash in and pay off their debts. They were about to trigger the insurance payout, clean out my son, and vanish off the face of the earth forever. "Frank," I said, my voice shaking. "They're at the end game. They're about to make their final move." "I know," he replied, his voice grim. "And we're running out of time to stop them." I stood on my porch, the phone still pressed to my ear, the evening air suddenly feeling 10 degrees colder. A one-way ticket to the Cayman Islands. An offshore account. They were planning to burn my son's life to the ground and dance on the ashes. The quiet fear I had been nursing for weeks erupted into a roaring blaze of fury. Frank's warning echoed in my head. "We're running out of time." He was right. The time for quiet observation was over. The time for protecting my son from the truth was over. The only way to save him now was to shatter his world completely. I hung up with Frank, walked inside, and dialed David's number. My hand was rock steady. "David," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "I need you to come over to my house. Right now. Don't ask questions. Just come." He must have heard the steel in my tone because he just said, "Okay, Mom. I'm on my way." While I waited, I turned my dining room table into a war room. I printed the credit card statements showing Jessica's hidden debts. I laid out the multi-million-dollar insurance policy. I had Frank email me his surveillance photos, and I printed them in glossy, undeniable color. Finally, I queued up Leo's video on my laptop, placing it right in the center of the table. It was a timeline of betrayal, laid out with the cold, hard precision of an auditor's report. When David walked in, his face was etched with worry. "Mom, what is it? What's wrong? Is it Leo?" "Leo is fine," I said, leading him to the dining room. "But you're not. Sit down, David. There's something you have to see." He saw the spread of papers on the table and frowned, confused. "What is all this?" I didn't say a word. I just turned the laptop toward him and pressed play. He watched the grainy video of his comatose wife scratching her cheek and opening her eyes to scan the room. He stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. He watched it again. And a third time. What is this?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "It's a glitch. A deepfake. Where did you get this?" "Leo took it," I said softly. "He told me she moves when you're not in the room. He wanted me to believe him." "Leo?" David shook his head, a desperate denial taking root in his eyes. "He's a kid, Mom. He's traumatized. He's imagining things. This isn't real." "The debt is real," I said, pushing the credit card statements toward him. "Tens of thousands of dollars, David. Online casinos. Cash advances. Did you know about this?" He stared at the papers, his confusion turning to shock. No, she told me she was investing in a friend's online boutique. A niche market," she said. "And is this real?" I slid the insurance policy in front of him. A 7-figure payout for an irreversible coma, taken out 2 months before she fell down the stairs. "Did you know she had this?" He recoiled from the document as if it were a venomous snake. His face had gone completely white. "No. We have a small policy through my old job. Nothing like this." "And are they real?" I finally tossed the surveillance photos onto the table. Jessica in scrubs, meeting Dr. Carter in a deserted diner, their faces grim and conspiratorial. "This was taken 3 nights ago, David. While you were at the hospital, holding her hand, she was sneaking out to meet with him. That was the final blow." He stared at the picture of his wife, alive, aware, and plotting. The carefully constructed world he had been living in, a world of grief and desperate hope, shattered into a million pieces. The denial, the confusion, it all just crumbled away, leaving behind a raw, gaping wound. He sank into a chair, his face in his hands, and a sound came out of him that wasn't a cry, but a howl of pure, absolute agony. I let him break. I stood there, my own heart breaking with his, as the full weight of the betrayal crashed down on him. He had not only been deceived, he had been made a fool of, his deepest love and devotion used as a tool in a monstrous scheme. After a long time, the sobbing subsided, replaced by a terrifying, dead calm. He lifted his head, and the grief in his eyes had been replaced by something I recognized, the same cold, hard anger that was burning in my own chest. "They're not getting away with this," he said, his voice flat and dangerous. "Mom, what do we do?" He was no longer the victim. He was my partner. I called Frank and put him on speakerphone. We explained the situation to David, including the one-way ticket to the Caymans and the visit from the creditor. "We have more than enough to go to the police," Frank said. "But Carter is a slippery guy with a lot of connections. His lawyer could argue that the video is fake, that the photos are misleading. The best way to nail them, to make sure they can't wriggle out of this, is to catch them in the act of finalizing the fraud." David nodded, his jaw tight. "The paperwork. Carter keeps telling me we need to sign the paperwork to authorize the next steps. That must be it." "Exactly," Frank said. "We go to the police, now. We present everything, and we propose a sting. We get them on tape making the final move." An hour later, we were sitting in a sterile interview room at the city's main police precinct. Across from a sharp, no-nonsense detective named Evans. She listened to our story. Her expression unreadable, examining each piece of evidence with a critical eye. When we finished, she leaned back, tapping a pen on her notepad. "I've seen a lot of insurance scams in my career, Mrs. Patterson," she said. "But this is a masterpiece of cruelty. Involving a child? That takes a special kind of monster." She looked from me to David, her eyes softening with a flicker of empathy. "You have a rock-solid case here. And I agree. A sting is our best shot. We need to catch Dr. Carter soliciting the final signature and your wife confirming the scam. We'll have the room wired for audio and video." As she was outlining the plan, David's phone, which was sitting on the table between us, buzzed to life. The caller ID read, "Dr. Carter." Detective Evans's eyes lit up. She held up a hand, signaling for silence, and pointed to the speakerphone button. David's hand trembled slightly as he answered the call. "David, my boy," Dr. Carter's smooth, sympathetic voice filled the small room. "I'm so sorry to call with this news. We ran another series of tests this afternoon. Jessica, she's had a setback. A significant one. There's no easy way to say this, but her brain activity is diminishing rapidly. I don't believe she'll make it through the week." I watched my son's face turn to stone as he played his part. "Oh, God. No. I know this is difficult," Carter continued, his voice oozing fake compassion. "But we need to discuss the next steps. It's time to sign the paperwork to have her condition officially declared terminal. It will allow us to proceed with a DNR and make her comfortable. Can you and your mother come to the hospital in the morning? Say, 10 o'clock? We can get everything settled then." "Yes, doctor," David said, his voice thick with emotion that was no longer fake, but pure, unadulterated rage. "We'll be there." He hung up the phone. The silence in the room was electric. This was it. The final move. The trigger for the entire trap. Detective Evans leaned forward, her face set and serious. She looked at me, then at David. "All right," she said, her voice low and steady. "It's time. Let's go over the plan one more time. Tomorrow morning, we end this." The drive to the hospital the next morning was silent, but it was a silence charged with purpose. The sun was bright, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue, a stark contrast to the darkness of the mission ahead. David sat beside me, his hands clenched on his knees, his face a mask of cold resolve. The broken, grieving man he had been for weeks was gone, replaced by a son and a father ready to fight for his family's soul. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was the instrument of justice. We knew Detective Evans's team was already inside. 2 officers were disguised as orderlies, another as a visiting family member down the hall. The small flower arrangement on Jessica's bedside table contained a high-definition camera, and David was wearing a wire. Every word, every move was about to be recorded. This wasn't a family visit. It was a raid. We walked down the familiar, antiseptic-smelling corridor and pushed open the door to room 412. The scene inside was perfectly staged. Dr. Carter stood by the window, his expression a masterpiece of solemn compassion. Nurse Chloe was checking in for drip, her movements jerky and her face ashen. She knew. She must have known this was the final day. And in the bed, Jessica lay perfectly still, her face pale, a single, fake tear glistening on her cheek. "David." "Carol," Dr. Carter said, his voice a low, respectful murmur. "Thank you for coming. I know this is the hardest day of your lives. David walked to the bedside, his movements heavy with a grief that was all too real, though its source had changed. He wasn't mourning the woman in the bed. He was mourning the woman he thought she was. He reached out and took her hand. I saw her fingers flinch almost imperceptibly at his touch. We've done everything we can, Carter continued his performance, stepping forward with a clipboard. The documents just formalize what the tests have already told us. It will certify her condition as irreversible, which will allow us to cease any further invasive measures and ensure she has a peaceful passing. He held out the clipboard and a pen to David. It's time. This was the moment. The culmination of all the lies, all the pain. David took the clipboard. He looked down at the papers that would sign away a life that wasn't in danger and sign over a fortune he never knew existed. He uncapped the pen. For a second, I saw him hesitate, the sheer weight of the betrayal threatening to crush him. He looked at me, and I gave him a small, almost invisible nod. You can do this. He took a deep breath, turned his back slightly to Dr. Carter, and looked directly down at Jessica's still face. The pen hovered over the signature line. Before I sign this, David said, his voice quiet but carrying across the silent room, I just have one question for you, Jessica. Dr. Carter stiffened. David, son, she can't hear you. David ignored him, his eyes locked on his wife. Was it worth it? All this pain, all this heartache. Was the money really worth what you did to Leo? The name of her son, spoken in that context, was the one thing her cold, calculating performance couldn't withstand. It was a direct hit. Jessica's eyes flew open. They were not the hazy, unfocused eyes of someone waking from a coma. They were sharp, wild, and filled with pure, animal panic. She pushed herself up with a strength that was shocking, her voice a raw, hysterical shriek. What are you talking about? Who told you? Was it the nurse? Her eyes darted to Chloe, who shrank back against the wall. Dr. Carter stood frozen, his face a canvas of disbelief and horror, the clipboard falling from his hand and clattering to the floor. The trap had been sprung. At that exact moment, the door burst open. Police! Nobody move! Detective Evans commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos as two uniformed officers flanked her. Jessica's face crumpled. The panic turned to a desperate, theatrical plea as she lunged toward David. David, honey, I can explain. I was going to tell you. The debts. They were going to hurt us. I did it for us. For our family. But David just stared at her, his expression empty of everything but disgust. Our family? You destroyed our family. You broke our son's heart. For money. The officers moved in. One cuffed a speechless Dr. Carter, who didn't even resist, his perfect, fraudulent world having evaporated in an instant. The other approached the bed. Jessica scrambled back, screaming, crying, a cornered animal making its last stand. As they placed the cold, silver handcuffs on her wrists, her eyes found mine across the room. They were filled with a burning, venomous hatred. I didn't flinch. I just held her gaze until she was led away, her sobs echoing down the hall. The aftermath was a blur of legal proceedings. With the mountain of evidence Frank and I had gathered, combined with the irrefutable video from the sting and a full confession from Nurse Chloe, the trial was short. Dr. Carter was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for fraud and medical malpractice. Jessica received 8 months have passed since that day. The storm is over. Life didn't snap back to normal. The old normal was built on a lie. We had to build a new one. David sold the house and, with the money, he and Leo moved into a smaller, cozier place near me. He's in therapy, talking through the anger and the grief. For the first time in years, I see my son's real smile again, not the weary one he'd been wearing for so long. Leo is the true miracle. With the truth out in the open, the quiet, fearful little boy has disappeared. He's loud, he's happy, he chases squirrels in the park and tells me silly jokes. His laughter is the music that healed our broken home. As for me, I'm back in my garden. My days are once again filled with the simple peace of pulling weeds and watching things grow. Sometimes, I look at the picture on my mantelpiece, the one of the smiling family on the beach, and I feel a pang of sadness for the illusion we lost. But then I look out my window and see my son, my real son, teaching my grandson how to fly a kite in the backyard. They are healing. They are hold out. I learned a lot through all this. I learned that the most dangerous lies aren't the ones we tell others, but the ones we tell ourselves. And I learned that a family's love, a real family's love, is a force of nature. It can be tested, it can be bent, but it can never truly be broken. It's like the foundation of a house. Even after a hurricane has torn everything else away, it remains. And on that foundation, you can always, always rebuild. Thank you for joining me on this journey. It wasn't an easy story to tell, but it's one I felt was important to share. What do you think is the most important lesson from this experience? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've ever had to find the strength to uncover a painful truth, please feel free to share your story. There is power in knowing you are not alone. If this story resonated with you, please show your support by clicking the like button. And to make sure you don't miss out on our next dramatic and thoughtful video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. No matter what storms you may be facing in your own life, please remember that the chaos does not last forever. May you find your peace, may you rediscover your strength, and may you always have a solid foundation on which to rebuild. Be well.